Very happy to be back with Ben Kaschula. Ben, your last talk went down really well, and a lot of people are interested in this very important part of our history. When we ended off last time, it was very interesting, you pointing out that it was actually the Prime Minister himself at a meeting in Mount Darwin who pointed out that internal affairs were not getting the support that they actually deserved and needed. And somebody appears to have missed the fact that you guys were probably better placed than almost anyone to know what was going on in these areas. So it was timely, I suppose, that the Prime Minister jumped in when he did and said, these guys need help.
Okay, well, going back to that incident, slight correction there. It was when the JOC was first formed, just after the first attacks had taken place on the 21st of December 1972, and the JOC was then based at Centenary, which is a farming area. And that was where the Prime Minister flew in on the VIP Dakota and the briefing took place. And it was at that briefing that I, if you like, at short notice, when the Prime Minister said, "Is that it?" and the military men and the Air Force men and policemen said, "Yes, that's it." And the Prime Minister said, "No, I want to hear from Internal Affairs. I want to hear about the people and the chiefs and their attitudes." And that was when I started by saying that there we were at this JOC, and they full up with military men and policemen and vehicles and arms and ammunition and cooks and all that. But I had not even a single vehicle, a single member of staff, or anything to make contact. And I was relying on the Air Force to take me to the District Commissioner at Mount Darwin or the District Commissioner at Sipholilo. And to make a phone call, I was imposing on the police on their network. I didn't have a radio or a member of staff or this. And what was more, the number of internal affairs staff and their backup men, field staff in the various stations were very few. And I gave the numbers: 15 at Mount Darwin, 12 at Sipholilo. And that they were very scarce on vehicles and on personnel and their budgets and all that sort of thing. And that is when the Prime Minister responded immediately, and within a short time they started getting more staff in the form of call-out people, young people. We call them IANS, IANS, which was Internal Affairs National Servicemen, because up until then the servicemen were called up for military service and they were attached to the military or to the Air Force or, shall we say, to the police. But the Internal Affairs were, coined the phrase, the common phrase, sucking the hind tit. And that changed after that outbreak of the war. But yes, may I at the outset thank you, Hannes, for inviting me to this discussion. I am honored and grateful, very grateful indeed to you. Thanks.
Ben, I'm honored. I'm just so pleased. Pritchie put me in touch with you, and we've been able to have these discussions because it's such an interesting part of our history and an important part of the history, and you cover it so very articulately. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you, Ben. Ben, is there anything that you'd like to pick up on before I start asking you a few questions from my side?
I think I should also make an apology because, you know, Hannes, I, as you know, am 86 years old, and I have, as you can appreciate, difficulty recalling names of people, and I stammer and stutter and forgetful. And from that point of view, I would like to record my apologies to you and viewers for that fault. Thank you.
No apologies asked for or expected, Ben. I think you're doing incredibly well, considering that this happened a long time ago, and your memory is quite remarkable. Ben, I just want to ask you about Mr. Jim Latham. When I got to Mount Darwin, when I was in the RLI, I came to know a bit about him, because what happened was one of the guys on a call out, on an actual contact, and this gives you an idea of how disciplined really the Rhodesian troops were. A Lance Corporal nicked a radio out of a hut in a village, and this was after a contact, and these people had either willingly or whatever had been actually feeding and supporting the enemy. So there was not any real reason to be terribly empathetic towards them. But anyway, he nicked a radio out of the one of the huts, stuck it in his pack, and off we went back to the Fire Force at Mount Darwin. And I don't know if it was the same day or the next day, the DC arrived, and he said there's been a report from a headman about a stolen radio. And this went straight to the Commander Major Orst, and there was an investigation, and this guy was found with the radio, and he was disciplined. I think he lost his one stripe as a result of that incident. That's when I first came to know about Mr. Jim Latham in Mount Darwin.
Okay, well, let me come in then. You will appreciate also and understand that I served with Jim Latham. He was actually also in the previous interview, I spoke about the delineation exercise where we were sorting out the boundaries between the we, us, ours, and the they, them, theirs, and what constituted the community, and why, and who they were, and mapping, and so on, you recall. Now, Jim Latham was also one of those four delineation officers and headed it. Jim Latham had spent time on a few district stations in Victoria Province and so on, but Jim Latham was stationed at Mount Darwin for quite a time and is an outstanding African linguist and administrator. Jim Latham is there in the country still, and is an author of a book. He's also written other, not just articles, but other publications as well. He is very well known in the tribal areas that he worked amongst them, and as I say, he knows the composition of the various chieftainships in the Zambezi Valley, their historical background, and their customs and all that. So he is quite an authority and quite an outstandingly knowledgeable, known administrator, district commissioner. Yeah.
Ben, do you remember a gentleman by the name of Migrants? He was also...
Yes, I do. I can tell you, David. His name was David Migrants, and let me tell you a sad bit about him. What happened is, when I was promoted to district commissioner, I took over at Wedza. Now, at that time, the word was sort of tumbling around with head office and where should I put you, and so on. And the Secretary for Internal Affairs indicated to me that he had wished me to go to either a new station outside of Matopo called Mudzi, or otherwise at Marewa, or otherwise failing that to be at Wedza. But it was his decision as to where I should go. But he indicated to me that those were the three places that he thought of placing me. In the event, he chose to put me at Wedza, and that is where I took over from Dave Migrants. And Dave Migrants then went to one of those other stations, which was Marewa. Now, Dave Migrants was also an outstanding young district commissioner, very fluent in the African language, very active insofar as getting around the district and communicating with the people and the chiefs and headmen. He was extremely active, and sadly, it was there that he became a casualty in the war and was killed at Marewa.
Yes, I read somewhere about the funeral. There was a massive turnout of local Africans after he was murdered, just as an indication of how much he'd obviously put into that area.
That is correct. As I said, he was not only respected in Marewa, but when I took over at Wedza, the Wedza people, where he had served for, I don't know how long, but it was a couple of years or so, he was loved in that and respected in Marewa as well as in Wedza, where I was now the district commissioner. But they came to love him, and he was extremely active in administering in his new district, Marewa, with a very sad end. Yes.
And that's where Father, what was his name? The chap who was working with the lepers, Father Bradburn. Did you have anything to do with him? He looked after the leper colony there in Marewa.
The leper colony was in Motoko, actually. Mutemwa, in Motoko, there was a leper colony, and the lepers did come there from outside the country as well. But that person you refer to, yeah, certainly was stationed at the leper colony at Mutemwa in Motoko district. And Motoko district is the adjoining district to Marewa. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was also murdered about 78, I think. Father John Bradburn. He is, I think, up. There's talk of canonizing him and him being made a saint. There's talk that there was a miracle around his body at the time of his burial. I don't know if you heard anything about that particular incident.
No, I can't recall details of that at all. But yes, can I take you back with appreciation, Hannes? You know, I told you about Andrew Parker Bowles and how Andrew Parker Bowles, when I was the head of the African service of the Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation, and how Andrew Parker Bowles came and saw me on numerous occasions. I omitted to tell you all the reasons. Let me add to that then and say he had personal responsibility for the safety of the, let's say, the
traditional leaders,
nationalist hierarchy.
Oh yes, yes. Okay.
Robert Mugabe, and those were his personal responsibility. But he also had their senior officers and so on. And it was him who brought not just the top, Mugabe and Nkomo, to my broadcasting studios to be recorded for us instructing the freedom fighters, if you like, guerrillas, to hand in their weapons at the assembly points. But after that, we came to the vote, for independence itself. Now that was a political campaigning, and airtime was given to all political parties to canvass for support, and therefore he continued to bring those people within those African nationalist political parties, ZIPRA, ZAPU, and ZANLA, ZANU. He brought their senior people to my offices to record political messages for broadcasting, to canvass for the vote which was going to take place and leading to Zimbabwe independence on the 18th of April, 1980. So I saw him on many occasions. But there was a bit of a sequel that, if I can add to that. You will recall I said that after the independence, I was recruited and I was appointed to the South African Broadcasting Corporation in Johannesburg to set up a black television channel. And there I was. Now it came to about 1982, and you remember me saying Andrew Parker Bowles indicated that a close friend of his that he played polo with was His Royal Highness Prince Charles, and he was a great friend of his, and that his wife Camilla was coming out to join him, and that she would accompany Prince Charles at the dinner on the evening before the raising of the Zimbabwe flag on the 18th of April, that she was coming out and she would be Prince Charles's partner at that final dinner. Now, in 1982, when Prince Charles married Princess Diana, we in the SABC were rebroadcasting that ceremony, followed by the carriage and the Prince and Princess Diana in the carriage going down the mall. And guess what? They were accompanied by the horsemen of the same unit as Andrew Parker Bowles. Was it Household Cavalry or whatever the unit was? And I was sitting in a group of about 8 or 10 people in the SABC in the same room watching the program. And when this came, I announced to the group, you see that man there riding behind, the one who's closest to Prince Charles by the right back wheel there. I know him. And this group of people, one man said, what do you mean you know him? I said, yes, I know him. I worked with him in Rhodesia. His name is Andrew Parker Bowles. I know him well. I can recognize him. And at that precise moment, the commentator on that broadcast of the BBC said, and he called out the names of the people that were riding, and he came, and when he got to that one, and Andrew Parker Bowles. Well, there was a glass of astonishment from the group in the SABC. What? How come?
Well, listening to this, one wonders when the affair actually started. Because they say Charles took a shine to Camilla before he married Diana. So who knows? It might have all sort of kicked off.
Yeah, according to Andrew, he didn't go into much detail. He just said, my wife and I are very close friends of Prince Charles, and he's a great friend of ours, and we see him frequently, and I play polo with him regularly. Well, that is the arrow, and Camilla is coming out to join here, and she'll be coming out one of these days, and just before the dinner. That's as much as I knew. I didn't know any more than that.
Well, listening to this, he probably didn't realize quite how close Camilla was to Charles. But yeah, a bit closer than he realized.
And as I say, it's all history now, and there we are talking about him, and there we are, he's the king and she's the queen. There we are.
Interesting. Ben, back to Rhodesia, I want to know more about Hostas Nicol, who goes down as a bit of a legendary figure in the history of native affairs. Just tell us a bit about him.
Well, let me tell you about Hostas Nicol. He was a very smallish man, but exceedingly competent in all African languages. He was completely fluent in Shona and in Ndebele, as well as the fringe languages like Batonka and so on. Not only that, he knew the tribal areas from one end of the country to the other. He knew the chiefs personally. He had served as a young man in various districts. He was also a great hunter and a crack shot at that. And he was very well known in the rural areas as not just an ordinary district commissioner, but a superior man. And he was a superior administrator and superior secretary for internal affairs. Now, let's go on. You will know also that the Africans gave the district commissioners their own nicknames. For example, there would be a tall man, and they would call him Murefu, which is translation tall man. And there would be another man who, for example, Noel Robertson, the Deputy Secretary for Internal Affairs, immediately under Foster Snickle in head office. He was always laughing, and his native name was Macheka, was Kusheka, is to laugh. And there were others. A man who smoked regularly was called Mahodja. So, and a very good linguist as well that I served under, A.P. Jackson, was the Native Commissioner at Mount Darwin in 1957 when I left Mount Darwin to go and do my military service, and I served under A.P. Jackson. His name, because he was so fluent, was Chimunu, which is translated in African, one of us, Chimunu. But there were other funny names as well for other native commissioners. The one who climbed hills always Chikura Makomo. But Foster Snickle's native name in some areas was Puranunzi. Now, Puranunzi translated is shoot a fly, and that was indicative of his fine marksmanship insofar as hunting elephants was concerned. But certainly at the time of independence, he was a well-known personality and was awarded the ID, the Independence Declaration, and accompanied the Prime Minister to the Tiger Talks and all those negotiations. He was the right-hand man for Ian Smith on the negotiations with the British government over independence. Right.
Yeah, amazing people you remind us of here, you know, and what great, you know, this was the age of the real civil servant, where people in government understood that they were there to serve people. Unfortunately, that seems to be lost on the modern world, where people in the public sector think that the people that put them there are there to serve them. It certainly wasn't the case in our old country, and unfortunately you don't see that replicated many places today. But Ben, I just want to ask you about the whole protected village concept and system, and just ask your thoughts on that. I mean, it was obviously designed to try and separate the populace from the insurgents and deny them succor. That, in simplistic terms, that I suppose is was the idea behind it. The Portuguese had a thing called aldeamentos, which was similar, and they had something similar in Vietnam, I think. But just tell us about your thoughts on the system in Rhodesia.
Yes, well, you rightly say that the prime purpose of the protected villages was to separate the population, and to some large extent, not just to separate them, but to protect them from the insurgents. And the greatest difficulty that the army had before the people were moved into protected villages was to go through the tribal areas in the remote parts there and know who was the enemy, because what the enemy were doing was mixing with the people and putting the firearm in a secret place and then posing as an ordinary tribesman. Yet, when the soldiers moved away again, they reverted to collecting the firearm and continuing to do their robberies. And there were a lot of just simple crime of using the weapon to go and rob the stores and so on. So to separate and to the people from the enemy, they put them into protected villages so that the areas were now clear of people, and anybody who was found to be there was taken as a target and taken as the enemy. So that was the way that, yes, it brought about a degree of hardship on closely packed people, tightly knitted and in a very confined area and fenced in and that sort of thing. But in a war like that, your greatest difficulty was to identify who your enemy was. Because they were, today is is an insurgent, and yesterday he was a tribesman, and he will be a tribesman again tomorrow when he puts his weapon away and mixes and attends the meetings and poses just as an ordinary tribesman amongst the people. So it was a concept that was done of necessity, and they could then also carry out other aspects of administration, checking on their health, and in a closed, confined area, set up clinics, and so there were some benefits as well from their health point of view, and even schools. They could not have to walk long distances to go to school. The schools were placed there. So there was hardship on the one hand, benefits on the other hand, and it made the military aspect of it more to operate in.
Yeah, I must say, I used to see those guys out in those what were known as keeps, and I felt quite sorry for them because they had a big job there, those internal affairs guys. A lot of people under their supervision, and they were most of them very lightly armed. And it must have been quite lonely for those district officers doing what they did. I take my hat off to them.
Again, at that point, the sad part, and this was a danger there, was that you had all these confined people there, and they were fenced in, and they were there. So the insurgents would simply come, and they were like sitting ducks. They could just come to the protected village or the keep, as it was called, and just come close up to them, open up with a weapon, and disappear into the bush again. They were just there as sitting targets, lightly armed, and not a lot of defences other than sandbags, and so they were easy, soft targets, which was bad. But that's the way it worked. Yes.
Ben, your time as in broadcasting, the RBC was always criticised for being a government mouthpiece and one thing and another. But my personal view on that is the whole world media was so geared up against us. We were fighting non-stop propaganda on an international level. The only way we could get our message out was through a sort of state-run broadcaster, and taking that all into account, I think it'll be remembered as a very, very professional service. And there were some outstanding presenters and producers. But just tell us about your role there and what your remit was as yes. On the African service.
Well, I would first of all agree with you entirely to say that the broadcasting service was well covered, let's say. The broadcasting stations and the staff that I worked with, not just the general service, which was called the English service, but the commercial service, and then, of course, the African service, and at that time, the television service. That was under the Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation service. The breakaway came when this television service became a public entity in a commercial service. But in my time, I of course joined them in what was it, 1970 or 75 or something. Anyway, when I joined them, I was in charge of all language broadcasting in Ndebele, which I had an office in Bulawayo as well as one in Harare, and responsible for the whole range of broadcasting. I mean, you had news bulletins, for example, that came from the newsroom. We didn't create news. What was news for the English listener was the same news for the African listener, except it was translated into the African language. But other programs for women, programs for the agricultural sector, programs for young people, and so on. The whole spectrum of broadcasting had to be and was was covered. I, in my time, looked at the languages and saw that there were certain language groups, small groups nevertheless, that were not receiving any programs. Now, let me tell you, those were, amongst them, the Batonka in the Zambezi Valley. There was no program of information or entertainment for them at all. Similarly, in the southeastern area, there was the people, the Chandans, who spoke language Chichangan. There was no programs in their language for them. Same, the Venda-speaking people down in Whitebridge, and they were not covered at all. So it was my responsibility, and I took that responsibility, recognizing that it was none, and I set aside an hour a week, for example, on a certain day for the Batonka people. And we went to record and sent our people out into those areas to record programs from them for rebroadcast to them in that language, and the same for the Shangon. So I created programs, a limited number according to the population, for those people that were not receiving programs previously. But yes, the broadcasting, the radio, was certainly a very useful tool for propaganda, if you want to use that word, but for information, for entertainment. I increased the amount of time devoted to the rural population for their tribal traditions and their customs, speaking to the elders about their origins and their interrelationship amongst their and so on. So that went down very well, and I was commended because my listenership in the time that I was there went up exceedingly. I think it was like 100% increase in listenership. And much of that, I would like to think, was because of more interesting programs. Maybe more radios became more readily available, and therefore the listenership went up. But nevertheless, the listenership survey indicated that the listenership had increased tremendously during that time.
Ben, did you have any interaction with P.K. van der Baal? Because I think he was Minister of Information at one stage, wasn't he? Was that during your time?
Yes, I did. He was actually, he had several different appointments. He was Minister of Information, as you say, at one time. He then also had the Ministry of Defense, and then he had another ministry again. He had several ministries
then
at different times.
Yeah.
But for example, I was acting district commissioner at Gatuna for a time before I was promoted. And while I was there, the Claw Dam, I think it was called, was completed, and there was to be an opening ceremony. And as district commissioner, I was to invite the VIPs to come to the opening service. And I invited, and I met with and discussed with him, Van der Waal, P.K. van der Waal, on that occasion. But there were other occasions too, where I had to discuss matters of common interest in the ministry that he then was in as a DC. And he was also, by the way, a hunter. He used to hunt in the Kariba district quite a lot. And I came across him when I was hunting in the Brooklyn district there. I say hunting, but let me elaborate a bit. The tribal areas were often encroached upon in those areas by raiding elephant on their crops. Lions would kill their livestock. Hyenas would kill their goats and that kind of thing. And so it was the district commissioner's responsibility, like to, when there was crop raiding like that again, to eliminate the elephant in particular was that. Now let me tell you about myself in that occasion. I was stationed at Samoa as a young 25-year-old, and for these reasons, there was a need for hunting and eliminating elephant in particular in the Sonoya district, going right down to the river in Chief Magonde's area. Chief Magonde is, Lomagundi, the district of Lomagundi, Karinagari, Lomagundi Road. All those take their names from the chief, Magonde. And when I was there, my district assistant messenger that I went hunting, that I had a great respect for, was called Chikweshe. Now, Chikweshe was a renowned, competent elephant tracker. He knew the movement of the elephants. He knew when they drank and the various foods, trees that they favored, and so on. And I hunted elephant with Chikweshe in Sonoya in 1963 on many occasions. And if I may say so, he had a degree, I think, of admiration or respect for me as a young 25-year-old hunting elephant and so on. And he said to me, he gave me a walking stick, and he said, and I'm bringing the walking stick to show you. I don't know if you can see it, but
lift it up. Lift it up, Ben.
Lift it up higher.
Yes, yes, yes.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Well, it's a carved walking stick. If you can see a face of a person. And now, Chikweshe gave me this walking stick in 1963. That is 60 years ago. And he said to me, boss, when you go old and you're an old man, you will walk with this walking stick and you will remember me and you will remember the places we went to and where we hunted and so on. Chikweshe. And it brings me to tears to say, to recall to you how Chikweshe, and 60 years later, is the walking stick that he gave to me. And it was an honor and to recall that incident to Chikweshe. But I'm digressing a bit now. What was your point? Sorry, Hannes.
Okay, Ben, I'm also struggling a bit here. It's such a sad and poignant telling story. And again, this wonderful relationship that you built up between black and white. And this is the tragedy of our country. There was so much of that. There was so much goodwill, and so much of it was generated by people like yourself. And it's just such a pity that the small minority of opportunist politicians poisoned that well. And the wreckage is what we live with. But what an amazing story.
Thomas, I will agree with you and say the key, I think, to what you are saying, the key to it for good relations was the language. The moment you could understand and speak their language, not only were you accepted so closely of your ability to converse with them in their language, that they made a friend of you. And the truth is that the sad part in the whole country was that we did not have an African language being taught in the schools.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, I would say that failure was a serious failure for, let's say, would have been improved race relations if that had been ability to converse in African language between the European white population and the African population. The language was the barrier or the key to good relations, without a doubt.
I think you're right, Ben. I think we had the most fantastic education system, but that was a mistake. We should have all been forced to learn an African language. And I saw what you talk about in practice with Roy Bennett, the late Roy Bennett. That was really the key to him being such a popular leader, was his ability to converse with the Africans in their own language and speak it so beautifully. And that endeared him to these people enormously and gave him this incredible following. And as a result, he became a very serious threat to the incumbents, and the rest is history. But it was Roy's command of the language that was such an important factor there.
Well, it was. I was now based in head office when this story came about. I was called in by the Deputy Secretary, Noel Robertson, in head office. And I had come off the delineation exercise where, as I told you previously, I had traveled widely in the rural areas on 4-year exercise of delineation of tribal communities with Jim Latham and 2 others. Independently, Alan Elliott was the Matabele expert down there. And Noel Robson called me in and he said, I'm sending you down to Buhera. The reason is this. Here's a file of papers. It goes back to 1930 when some people from Matabele land were resettled because of consolidating the tribal areas into not have a small tribal group in the middle of a European farming area and a chief in that. And there was a degree of consolidation. And this chief was moved from Matabele land into vacant land settled in Buhera district, which is of course Trana. And this problem has been going on ever since 1930. And I get sick of this correspondence here. It's unending. The boundary dispute between this chief, and his name is Chief Fish, Gwebu Fish. And I'm sending you down to Buhera, listen to the disputes, take evidence, and make a determination. So off I went. Notice was given to the DC of Buhera that Ben Kaschula from head office was coming, and he would meet with the chiefs and their followers to the dispute over creating a distinctive boundary between them and to define their areas, because it has been going on for 30 years and has not been settled. So off I went, and when I got there, the chiefs had been informed that I would meet with them, and off we went. Well, I went off with about 6 or 8 messengers to the appointed place, and there they were in 2 groups. To the right of me was Chief Fish and his followers, and they were armed to the teeth with spears, bows and arrows, clubs, you name it. And on the left was a tribal group from the other chief there with his followers equally armed, and so on. And I announced that I was coming to listen to them, listen to the case, and to try and settle this dispute over the boundary creation between them. And the first thing I did was to instruct the messengers to disarm the 2 groups. And I said to the 3 messengers, yeah, you take all their spears, arrows, bows, clubs, knives, pangas, whatever you can, disarm them all and put them in a pile there and guard them that they don't take them. And the same for the other group there. Disarm them, because they were shouting at each other, jeering and so on against the 2 groups, and disarm them. I then listened to the evidence, the background to it all, and I said, all right, where was the starting point? Where do we go to? And they said, we go to a place called Chisipiti Cha Munangate. Chisipiti is, of course, a spring. And Chisipiti Cha Munangate is Munangate's spring. Oh, we went to Munangate Spring. There was this wet area there thing, and I said, right. Immediately, the one group said, his spring first is situated elsewhere there. And when that spring dried, that is when he moved here. So this is not Chisipiti Tamunangate. This is the second time where he moved to. We must go to the original place. So off we went down to the original. And that group, when we got there, said, yes, this is it. You can see there the ruins are of his huts where he stayed here. This is where. And I said, right, where did the boundary go? one group said like this, oh, Gauta went over there. They would say, no, the boundary goes this way over here, there. So I put halfway down the middle and I said, basically, shortly, if you can't agree, we'll put it in the middle. Messenger, debark that tree in the middle there. Debark it. Went, took the bark off that tree in the middle. Went there and by a series of this direction, no, this direction, halving it, and a series of straight lines and debarking of the trees. We had maps, marked them on the map, and by a series of straight lines, we came to the end point, which they did agree on, which was where a little stream river joined another river. And at that junction, that was where the boundary was agreed upon to end. But how to get there was where the disagreement came. But we did this by, I don't know what you call it, Solomon's justice or whatever, by a series of straight lines, debarking of trees. And I then said, right, you can put a fence down now here, you can. Everybody on this side will owe allegiance to Chief Fish Level. And if you don't like it, you will move. If your allegiance is not to that chief, you move across the line and you resettle on the other side and you belong to that chief. Cheers went out and everybody was happy with that. And finally, this dispute was now settled, if you like. Well, I went back to head office. I reported to Noel Robertson. Sir, I went down, listened to the evidence. We did this. There were great arguments between them. I started the meeting by disarming the two tribal groups, disarming them and guarding the weapons against, so that there would be no fighting. And I made the determination that barked the trees, marked it on the map, and everybody would appear to have been satisfied. Jokingly, Noel Robertson said, what I would have done? No. I said, no, sir. So I would have not disarmed them, told them, fight it out, and where the bodies lie the thickest, I'll draw the line.
Oh, what a story. Ben, who were the ministers of internal affairs that you worked under?
Well, again, I think I apologized previously. Some of the names, there was a man who walked with a walking stick, double barrel name, he was a minister of internal affairs about
Sutton
Price I worked under when I was seconded to the Prime Minister's office in Ted Sutton Price. That was for the psychological exercise. I was DC at Windsor when I got a call from head office to say, report here immediately. And I went to head office and sat there, and the Secretary for Internal Affairs said, the Prime Minister was prevailed upon by the Army to set up a psychological department for this war, psychological warfare or psychological action. And I was called upon to submit some names. I submitted some names. The Prime Minister looked at the names and he said, give me Kaschula. And that's why you're here. You are now seconded and attached to the Prime Minister's office, where this will take it from there. And you will join up with an Army man, an Air Force man, policeman, and so on, and that. So I worked under Ted Sutton Price. Of course, his son, Lawford Sutton Price, was a well-known broadcaster on Rhodesia Broadcasting Service. So not only did I work with his father, I worked with him as well. But the other minister, the one that I worked with for a longer period, I think would fairly be said to be D.H. Musset.
And how did you get on with him, Ben?
Very, very well. He was, I thought, exceedingly good, extremely. When I first joined the department, I wasn't at that seniority level to deal with ministers. You know, it was only later when I was assistant DC and DC that I was the returning officer in Umtali for one of the general elections, and I made the announcement when I did the count for the Umtali Central constituency, and I made the announcement as the returning officer appointed in terms of section so-and-so of the Electoral Act. I announced the result of the thing is such and such a number of votes for such and such a person and such and such Rhodesia Front, B.H. Mussett. And I therefore declare Mr. Mussett to be duly elected for the Antali Central constituency.
Yeah, Ben, it's funny. I remember some of those elections because my dad actually ran as an independent in '74. He was good friends with old Ian Smith, and Jack Harmon was a very good friend. But my old man, who was also a great African linguist, by the way, Jack Harmon. But my dad, he said that an opposition of some sort was required because the RF, as you know, was all powerful, and so he ran as an independent and didn't get very far. But I think he was in Umtali East, and Jack Christie was the RF MP who won that seat. But things were very, very civilized in those days.
Well, Hannes, you mentioned Jack Harmon. Let me remind you then that Jack Harmon had a brother, Roger Harmon.
Yes.
And Roger Harmon was absolutely incredibly good as a linguist and an administrator, and he was the Deputy Secretary of Internal Affairs.
Yeah.
And again, a man that I have great respect for and worked with in head office. And so that family, the Harmon family, Roger Harmon was a legend in, and I think I'm right in saying their father was in history a previous native commissioner as well.
Yeah, the Harmon family and my family are very, very close since I was born. We've been very close friends from Umtali days, and the old man Harmon, Jack's and Roger's father, if I remember correctly, he actually walked up from Beira. He was one of those guys that came out and they walked from Beira into what was then just becoming Rhodesia. It was still a charter administered state, but right in the early years, old man Harmon arrived, and then there was Jack, Roger, and Tim, and Jack became Minister of Defence, and then he stayed on after Defence for a while, but all highly respected people.
I had the honour of working with people that were of that caliber. You mentioned already Foster Snickle. I mean, previous to him, Stan Morris, equally famous in that. Now, Roger Harmon, other Peter van der Bar, Mussett.
Yeah.
I had the honour of working, and some native commissioners as well. I mentioned A.P. Jackson, and there were others. Jack Brendan was an amazing man as well. I served under Jack Brendan in Machoko, and then again at Sonoya. Louis de Brain served under him at Putu, and he was an amazing person as well. Yes. It just comes to mind when I was at duty, not a rural area, but a very densely populated area. And Louis de Brain called me into the office one morning and he said, "Listen, I'm sending you out. There's this man who's come to report to me that they've got a leopard that is up in a tree, and he's asked me to come and send somebody out to shoot it." He said, "I'm sending you out with him to point it out, but not to shoot it, to let it take the dogs away and let the leopard go free, because the leopard kills the baboons which are raiding their crops more." And so off I went with this man in the Land Rover, drove out about 10 kilometers, not thickly populated, not densely wooded, and sure enough there was 6 or 8 dogs barking under the tree, and there was a male, huge leopard sitting in the tree, and the dogs just barking underneath. I said, take the dogs, come away, bring them away. The moment we left with the dogs, a leopard jumped out of the tree and it was gone like a flash. Hell, it could move. I saw how a leopard could run. Yeah, that was a good incident that I recall now.
Ben, just in wrapping up, Ian Smith, just summarize your thoughts on the man that you got to know, just from your personal point of view.
A man I admired extremely. There wasn't a person in this country, I think, at that time that was of higher caliber in terms of his ability, his knowledge, his communication. He remained a fair-headed person. He was never rattled. He never raised his voice or anything. He had control of himself under all manner of provocation. He remained calm, level-headed, and he could call on and knew so many things about the country, so many chiefs in the country, so much historical and numbers. He could recall figures of whether it was population or production, or he had it at his fingertips. He was an amazing man. Thank you, Hannes.
Ben, thank you.
It's a great honor to have been invited to have these discussions with you. Thank you very much indeed.
Ben, I can't thank you enough. You're a man who I hold in the highest regard, and I thank you for your time, and also thank you for all you did for our country. I know that you gave it everything you had, and ever grateful.
And if I can end with my recollection and respect with my walking stick, there we are, with memory of and tribute to Chikweshe, my tracker of 60 years ago. And Chikweshe, Kyle, Chikweshe, Sambataro.
Thank you, Ben.